A store cashier offers a struggling teenage mother free diapers in her desperate situation, unaware that his simple act of kindness will cost him his job. The next day, a helicopter lands near his apartment building, delivering a shocking revelation about the young mother, one that will leave him questioning who she really is. Welcome to Unveiled Narratives. Enjoy today's story, full of unexpected twists and heartwarming surprises. Ben, a new cashier still getting used to the job, was having a quiet day as he scanned items at the register. He noticed a teenage mother in the baby aisle. She cradled a baby tightly against her chest. The young woman's face betrayed a storm of worry. Her gaze shifted between two items, diapers and baby formula. She reached for the diapers, her fingers trembling as she touched the package. Her eyes scanned the price tag. Then her attention moved to the formula. Her hand hovered above it, hesitation written in the lines of her furrowed brow. It was clear she couldn't afford both. For a moment, she stood frozen, torn between necessity and sacrifice. Finally, with a shaky breath, she chose the formula, her hand brushing over the diapers one last time before she turned toward the register. Her steps were slow, her posture weighed down by unspoken struggles. From behind the counter, Ben watched intently. He didn't need words to understand her story. Her silence said everything. The young woman approached the register, holding her baby close and placing the can of formula on the counter with trembling hands. Her eyes lowered as though trying to avoid drawing attention. Ben scanned the formula and noticed her gaze drift toward the diapers, a look of longing in her eyes. It was clear she wanted them, but the thought of affording both items was too much to bear. Ben paused for a moment. He glanced at the baby snug against her chest, its tiny eyes blinking sleepily, unaware of the struggle unfolding. "Just the formula?" Ben asked softly, his voice careful not to startle her. She nodded but didn't meet his gaze. Ben took a deep breath, his hand lingering on the counter. "You forgot the diapers," he said gently, gesturing to the package in her cart. Her head snapped up, and for a moment, panic flickered in her eyes. I can't," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Without hesitation, Ben reached into his pocket, pulling out his wallet. He swiped his card across the reader and handed her the diapers. "Take them," he said, his tone firm yet kind. "You can pay me back whenever you're able." The woman's lips parted, but no words came out. Her eyes filled with tears, spilling over as she held the diapers close. She looked at Ben, overwhelmed, and managed only a whispered, "Thank you." To her, these diapers weren't just essentials, they were hope wrapped in soft packaging, a quiet answer to her silent prayers, proof that even in her darkest moments, kindness could still find her. Ben gave a small nod, meeting her gaze. "Take care of your little one," he said with a steady voice. As the woman walked away, the murmurs behind her began to grow louder. A few customers exchanged disapproving glances, their whispers now turning into full voices directed at Ben. "Do you think that's fair?" one man grumbled, his arms crossed, looking over at Ben. "You just gave away products. This is a store, not a charity." "Yeah, I don't know about that," a woman chimed in, shaking her head as she adjusted her purse. "People shouldn't just get things for free. What kind of store lets that happen?" Ben's fingers tightened around the register, his hands freezing in place, his heartbeat racing in his chest as he glanced up, meeting the eyes of the small group. Some looked annoyed, others simply puzzled, but none of them seemed to understand what had just occurred. He opened his mouth, about to explain, but no words came out. What could he say? He knew his actions were right, but the weight of the store's policies settled heavily on his shoulders. Before he could respond, Mr. Carter, the store manager, appeared at the end of the aisle. His expression was grim, and Ben knew the conversation that was coming. The manager's eyes darted to the murmuring customers before focusing back on Ben. Later that evening, after the store had quieted down, Ben found himself in Mr. Carter's office. Ben could feel the tension in the air as Mr. Carter's gaze never wavered. I heard about what happened today. You gave away merchandise, and that's a clear violation of store policy, the manager said, his voice steady. You didn't follow procedure, and we can't allow that. I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to let you go. Ben's stomach sank. He nodded, unable to argue. He had acted out of kindness, but the policy was clear, and he knew there was no room for exceptions. Mr. Carter handed him his final paycheck, and their brief handshake felt final. Ben turned and left the office. Later that night, in his apartment, Ben grabbed his notebook and began scribbling ideas under the dim light of his desk lamp. Local cafes, retail stores, even odd delivery jobs, anything that could bring in some income. He couldn't afford to waste time feeling sorry for himself. As he worked, a wave of anxiety washed over him. Tomorrow, he'd start his job hunt, but the uncertainty of the future loomed large. Exhaustion began to set in, and he drifted off to sleep. But his morning took an unexpected turn. Instead of his alarm, Ben was woken by a low rhythmic hum that grew louder by the second. Rubbing the sleep from his eyes, he shuffled to the window and froze. A sleek black helicopter was descending into the small parking lot behind his apartment building, dust and leaves swirling in its wake, drawing curious neighbors to their windows. Before Ben could process what was happening, a sharp knock echoed through his apartment. His pulse quickened as he moved cautiously to the door. Opening it, he found two men in dark suits standing in the hallway. Ben Foster, one of them asked, his voice steady and polite. Yeah, Ben replied, his confusion obvious. The taller man extended his hand. Good morning, Mr. Foster. My name is William, and this is my colleague, Daniels. We're here on behalf of Mr. Harris. The name hit Ben like a lightning bolt, his eyes widening with recognition. Wait, Mr. Harris? You mean the billionaire? The one who owns all those tech companies and half the real estate downtown? William nodded. Yeah, the one and only. Ben stared, struggling to connect the dots. Mr. Harris was a man he'd admired for years, a brilliant entrepreneur and philanthropist who seemed to turn everything he touched into gold. But what could someone like him possibly want with Ben? William continued, We need to ask you something. Did you assist a young mother at your store yesterday? Ben blinked, taken aback. Yeah, I helped her out. What happened? Is she all right? William nodded, his tone reassuring. She's fine and safe. He paused, then added, Do you know she's the daughter of Mr. Harris? Ben's eyes widened in surprise. His daughter? Are you telling me she's really his daughter? William nodded again. Yes, we're serious. Ben struggled to process the revelation. The woman from yesterday, frazzled, desperate, and unable to afford basics, was the daughter of a man who could buy an entire store. Ben's brow furrowed in confusion. But why? Why was she struggling like that? She couldn't even afford diapers. How does that happen? William hesitated, choosing his words carefully. It's a family matter. Let's just say that circumstances aren't always what they appear, even for people like the Harris family. Daniels, who stood silently, stepped in, his voice calm but earnest. Mr. Harris wants to thank you personally. He'll explain everything about his daughter and their situation. Ben hesitated, torn between anxiety and curiosity, but when William gestured toward the waiting helicopter, he couldn't resist the urge to find out more. Grabbing his jacket, Ben followed them outside. The whir of the rotors filled the air as he climbed into the helicopter, neighbors watching from their windows with a mix of curiosity and awe. The helicopter landed gently on the estate's private helipad. Ben stepped out, his eyes scanning the grand property, but only one figure stood waiting, Mr. Harris, dressed sharply. He approached Ben with a composed demeanor, extending his hand. Mr. Foster, Harris began warmly, shaking Ben's hand firmly. Thank you for coming. I wanted to speak with you personally. Ben nodded, unsure of what to expect. Of course, but what's all this about? Harris's expression softened, and a hint of gratitude mingled with sadness in his eyes. It's about my daughter, the woman you helped yesterday. You have no idea what that meant to her and to me. Harris gestured toward a nearby bench, signaling Ben to sit. As they settled, he took a deep breath before continuing, his voice steady but laced with emotion. She made a mistake, Harris began. A bad choice, really. She trusted the wrong person, a young man named John, her high school friend. At first, he seemed charming, supportive, and ambitious, but as it turns out, John was only interested in her for her name, her connections, and the advantages her family could provide. Ben leaned forward, his attention locked on Harris. They started a relationship, Harris continued, his tone tinged with regret. Despite my warning, she believed in him. She even turned her back on her family to be with him, convinced she was making the right decision. But life doesn't always work out as planned. He paused, his hands clasped tightly. She became pregnant, and for a while, John stayed. He played the part of a supportive partner until the responsibilities of fatherhood became too real. Slowly, he began to distance himself, making excuses, dodging his duties, and one day, he left her completely, disappearing without a word. Ben felt a pang of sympathy as Harris continued, his voice dropping lower. She was too ashamed to come back to her family and admit what had happened. Instead, she took on odd jobs to make ends meet, trying to provide for herself and her baby. She didn't want me to know how much she was struggling. Harris's voice cracked slightly, but he steadied himself. I only found out recently through someone else. When I learned the truth, I went to her immediately. She's my only child, Mr. Foster. I love her more than anything in this world. I brought her and the baby back home, where they belong. Ben remained silent, his heart heavy as he listened. Yesterday, Harris continued, his voice softening, she told me what happened at that store. She didn't have enough money to buy both formula and diapers for her child. She was desperate, afraid to ask for help, and then you stepped in. Harris met Ben's eyes, his gratitude palpable. You don't know how much that act of kindness meant to her, to me. She said you didn't hesitate, didn't ask questions, just helped. I can never thank you enough for that. Ben shifted uncomfortably, brushing off the praise. I just did what anyone would do. I saw someone in need. Harris smiled faintly. You'd be surprised how few people would do what you did. And my daughter, she wanted to thank you herself. He stood, motioning toward the estate. Come inside, she's waiting to meet you. Ben followed Harris into the grand foyer, the elegance of the estate barely registering as his mind churned with uncertainty. In the sitting room, she was waiting, the young mother he had helped. Her eyes were filled with gratitude and a hint of nervousness as she clutched her baby. Mr. Foster, this is my daughter, Maria, Mr. Harris said, gesturing toward her with a proud smile. Maria stepped forward, her voice trembling slightly. Thank you. What you did yesterday, it meant everything. I don't know how I'd have managed without your kindness. Ben shifted uncomfortably, offering a modest smile. It was nothing, really. I just did what anyone would do. She shook her head firmly. No, it wasn't nothing. You didn't just help, you treated me with dignity when I couldn't even ask for it. That mattered. Her words struck Ben, but before he could reply, she added, when we went back to thank you, we learned what happened, that you lost your job because of me. I felt terrible. You didn't deserve that. Ben shrugged, trying to brush it off. It's not your fault. Things like that happen. Mr. Harris stepped forward, holding a slim envelope. We can't undo what happened, but we want to set things right. Ben hesitated before accepting it, his breath catching as he opened it. Inside was a stack of bills, far more than the cost of diapers. This is too much, Ben said, his voice unsteady. Harris placed a steady hand on his shoulder. It's not just for the diapers. Think of it as a way to cover your college expenses. We've heard about how hard you've been working, and this is the least we can do. Ben's hands trembled. I don't know how to thank you. I can't. You can, Harris said with a gentle smile. And you should. Maria and I insist, she added, her eyes warm. Please, Mr. Foster, you deserve this. Harris continued, his tone serious yet encouraging, and there's one more thing. You've lost your job, but I'd like to offer you something better, a position at my company. You've shown integrity and compassion, qualities we value deeply. If you're willing, there's a place for you. Ben's heart raced as Harris's words echoed in his mind. A position at his company? It didn't seem real, too good to be true. He had worked so hard, juggling jobs and sacrificing his own dreams just to make ends meet. But now, here was the opportunity he had always wanted. For a moment, everything around him blurred as his mind flooded with memories. He remembered his mother's words, spoken to him countless times over the years, kindness will come back to you, Ben. It may take time, but it always finds its way back. He had always believed in those words, but in that moment, it felt like a stroke of luck. How could his simple act of kindness lead him to this? A real job, a chance at a future he never thought was possible, a job that would allow him to follow his dream and build a life he was proud of. He glanced at the baby in the young mother's arms and then back at Mr. Harris. The weight of everything, the disbelief, almost overwhelmed him. His hand trembled as he found his voice. I don't know how to thank you. This is more than I ever expected. Mr. Harris's smile was warm and understanding. You've earned it, Ben. You've shown that kindness can change everything. If this story left an impression on you, show your support by liking this video and subscribing to our channel. Your encouragement allows us to continue sharing impactful stories with the world. Thank you for giving your time, and we'll see you in the next video.